I set the salad down and started to sit when my mother-in-law's voice cut through the ocean breeze like a rusty knife. The help doesn't eat with family. The words hung in the air as 5 pairs of eyes turned toward me, waiting to see if I'd crumble like I always did. But this time, something shifted. I looked her dead in the eye and smiled. "Good to know," I said, my voice steady as granite, "because the help owns this resort." You know that moment when everything you thought you knew gets flipped upside down? When the person you've been underestimating reveals they've been 10 steps ahead the entire time? Well, buckle up, because what happened next at that dinner table changed everything. I'm Rebecca, and for 2 years I'd been playing the perfect daughter-in-law to Mark's family, nodding when his mother Patricia made snide comments about my simple background, smiling when his sister Jennifer would accidentally forget to include me in family photos, staying quiet when they'd discuss their business ventures like I couldn't possibly understand. They saw exactly what they wanted to see, a grateful girl who'd landed way above her station by marrying their precious Mark. The Martinez family owned half the hotels on this stretch of Caribbean coastline. At least that's what they told everyone. Patricia wore her family legacy like a crown, constantly reminding anyone within earshot about their old money and established connections. She'd perfected the art of making people feel small while maintaining that saccharine smile that never quite reached her eyes. That morning had started like every other family gathering. Patricia, holding court at the head of the table, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her coffee cup as she surveyed her domain. The resort's infinity pool sparkled beyond the terrace, and guests in designer swimwear dotted the pristine beach below. It was paradise, if you could ignore the venom disguised as family bonding. "Rebecca, dear," Patricia had said, her tone dripping with false sweetness, "would you mind helping Maria clear the breakfast dishes? She's getting on in years, and I'm sure she'd appreciate the extra hands." The dismissal was subtle but clear. I wasn't family. I was free labor. But here's what none of them knew, what I'd kept hidden behind 2 years of fake smiles and bitten tongues. Can you guess what my secret was? Leave a comment if you think you know, because trust me, it's bigger than you imagine. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, his wedding ring catching the light. "Mom, Rebecca's on vacation too," he said weakly, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. He loved his family, wanted their approval so desperately that he'd started seeing me through their lens. The girl who got lucky, the outsider who should be grateful for scraps. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor. "Of course," I said, gathering plates with practiced efficiency. "I'm happy to help Maria." The elderly woman who'd been serving this family for 15 years shot me a grateful look, her weathered hands trembling slightly as she balanced the serving tray. As I walked toward the kitchen, I caught fragments of their conversation resuming behind me. Jennifer's laugh, sharp and dismissive. "She's trying so hard to fit in, isn't she?" Patricia's response, low but audible. "Well, some people just aren't born to this life." That's when it hit me, the moment of clarity that changes everything. I was standing in the resort's commercial kitchen, surrounded by stainless steel and the controlled chaos of lunch prep, when I saw my reflection in the walk-in freezer door. Who was that woman staring back at me? When had I become so small? The lunch rush was beginning, and the head chef nodded at me with professional courtesy. "Mrs. Martinez," he said, not knowing which Martinez I was. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" "Perfect as always, Chef Ramon," I replied, watching through the service window as my in-laws continued their performance of superiority on the terrace. They had no idea that Chef Ramon reported directly to me, that every staff member in this resort answered to me, that the woman they treated like help actually signed their paychecks. You see, here's the thing about assumptions. They make people sloppy, make them careless with their words, their actions, their secrets. For 2 years, I'd been the perfect audience for their little superiority show, and they'd gotten comfortable. Too comfortable. I returned to the table with fresh drinks, playing my part one more time. Patricia barely looked up from her phone as I set down her iced tea. "Thank you, dear." "Oh, and would you mind asking someone to adjust our umbrella? The sun is hitting Jennifer just wrong for her Instagram photos." "Mom," Mark started, but Jennifer cut him off with a wave of her hand. "It's fine, Mark. Rebecca doesn't mind helping out. Do you, Rebecca?" She tilted her head, studying me like I was a mildly interesting insect. "I mean, you must be used to this kind of work, right? Given your background?" There it was, the thing they'd been dancing around for 2 years, my background. The fact that I'd worked my way through college waiting tables, that I didn't summer in the Hamptons or winter in Aspen, that my family didn't have a trust fund or a family crest or whatever other markers of worth they valued. What they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to learn, was that those years of working multiple jobs had taught me something their privilege never could. How to see opportunities where others saw obstacles, how to turn determination into dollars, how to build something real instead of just inheriting it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started, because the moment at that lunch table wasn't the beginning. It was the climax of a story that had been building for years. 3 years ago, I was working as a financial consultant in Miami when I first heard about the Coral Bay Resort. It was hemorrhaging money, beautiful property, but terrible management. The owners were desperate to sell, but the price tag scared off most investors. I saw something different. I saw potential that others missed. So I did what I'd always done. I worked, I researched. I found 3 silent partners who believed in my vision, and together we made an offer that the desperate owners couldn't refuse. Not the Martinez family. They were just the management company, holding a contract that was set to expire in 5 years. They thought they owned the place, but they were essentially very well-paid employees. The irony was perfect. While they looked down on me for my working background, that same background had given me the skills to buy the very resort they considered their family legacy. I met Mark 6 months after the purchase was finalized. He was charming, genuinely kind, and completely unaware that the woman he was falling for owned the resort where his family held their weekly power lunches. By the time I realized who his family was, I was already in love with him. And by the time we got married, I was too curious to see how deep their arrogance went to reveal the truth. Now, sitting at that table, watching Jennifer pose for her influencer photos, while Patricia complained about the service quality of the resort I owned, I realized my little social experiment had gone too far. The woman in the freezer door reflection was right. I'd made myself too small for too long. "Actually," I said, setting down the pitcher of iced tea with deliberate precision, "I think I'll take that seat after all." Patricia's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together. "Excuse me?" I said, "I'll sit down now. You know, with the family." I pulled out my chair and sat, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Since this is a family lunch and I am family. The tension at the table shifted like a sudden change in barometric pressure. Mark looked confused, Jennifer's phone slowly lowered, and Patricia's smile became predatory. "Of course, dear," Patricia said, her voice silk over steel. "Though I do think there are certain protocols that should be observed. Some people are more comfortable in supporting roles." "Supporting roles," I repeated, tasting the words. "Like help, you mean?" "Well," Jennifer jumped in, sensing blood in the water, "let's be honest about what everyone brings to the table. Some of us were born into this world, and others marry into it." The thing about Jennifer was that she'd never worked a day in her life, but she'd convinced herself that managing her Instagram account and planning charity galas constituted a career. She lived off the family trust fund and considered herself an entrepreneur because she'd tried to launch a lifestyle blog that folded after 6 months. "You're absolutely right," I said, my voice growing steadier with each word. "We should definitely be honest about what everyone brings to the table." Mark reached for my hand, probably sensing the shift in my energy even if he didn't understand it. "Babe, Maybe we should— No, Mark, your sister's right. Honesty is important. I turned to face Jennifer directly. Tell me, what exactly do you bring to this table, besides your father's credit card and your mother's connections? Jennifer's mouth fell open slightly. In 2 years, I'd never pushed back, never challenged their narrative. I was the quiet one, the grateful one, the one who knew her place. How dare you? Patricia's voice could have cut glass. This is our family resort, our table, our— Your what? I interrupted, and the sound of my own voice surprising me with its strength. What exactly is yours here, Patricia? The older woman's face flushed red against her platinum blonde hair. Everything. This resort has been in our family for 5 years, I finished. You've managed it for 5 years under a contract that expires next month. But that's not ownership, is it? Silence fell over the table like a heavy curtain. Even the ambient sounds of the resort seemed to fade. The distant laughter from the pool, the clink of dishes from other tables, the gentle crash of waves on the beach below. Mark's hand went slack in mine. Rebecca, what are you talking about? I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for this exact moment. My hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been in 2 years. I'm talking about ownership, Mark. Real ownership. I spread the documents across the table, watching their faces as they processed what they were seeing. Incorporation papers, purchase agreements, property deeds, all bearing my name, my signatures, my company's letterhead. Coral Bay Resort, I said, my voice carrying across the terrace, is owned by Martinez Holdings, LLC. That's my company. I bought it 3 years ago from the Hendersons when they couldn't make their loan payments. Patricia grabbed the papers with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the legal text as if she could make it say something different. This is impossible. You own nothing, I said, the words falling like stones into still water. You have a management contract that I inherited when I purchased the property, a contract that, as I mentioned, expires next month. Jennifer's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. But we've been running this place for years. We built this reputation. You managed it adequately while the real owners were drowning in debt, I corrected. I bought it, renovated it, increased its value by 300%, and turned it into the profitable enterprise it is today. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Mark stared at the papers, then at me, then back at the papers. You've owned this place for 3 years, since before we met. Since 6 months before we met, actually. I reached across and touched his hand gently. I fell in love with you, Mark. Not your family's reputation or their management contract. You. Patricia's voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. All this time, you let us— I let you show me exactly who you are, I said. For 2 years, I've been the quiet daughter-in-law, watching you treat staff like servants, listening to you dismiss my background, hearing you talk about your resort, like you built it with your own hands. I stood up slowly, the documents rustling in the ocean breeze. You want to know about backgrounds, Patricia? I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college. I started my consulting firm with $2,000 and a laptop. I saw potential in this place when you saw only a paycheck. The realization was dawning on their faces, like a slow, terrible sunrise. Everything they'd held over me, every subtle insult and dismissive comment, had been based on a lie they'd told themselves. So when you say the help doesn't eat with family, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word, you're absolutely right, because the help, that's you, works for me. The silence that followed my revelation felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane, everything around us suspended in this perfect, terrible calm before the world exploded back into motion. Patricia's hands trembled as she held the ownership documents, her perfectly manicured fingers leaving small creases in the paper. Jennifer's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, while Mark just stared at me like I'd suddenly grown a second head. But here's the thing about truth. Once it's out, you can't stuff it back in the box. And I'd been keeping this particular truth locked away for so long that watching it finally breathe felt like liberation. "This can't be real," Patricia whispered, her voice cracking on the last word. You're nobody. You're from nowhere." That's when I felt it. That moment when everything inside you shifts from defense to offense. When you stop protecting yourself and start protecting your truth. I walked around the table slowly, deliberately, letting my heels click against the marble with each step. "Nobody," I repeated, pulling out my phone. "Chef Ramon, could you join us on the terrace for a moment and bring the quarterly reports?" Within 30 seconds, Chef Ramon appeared with a leather portfolio under his arm, his chef's coat pristine despite the lunch rush. "Yes, Mrs. Martinez." The sound of my married name and his respectful tone hit the table like a physical blow. Jennifer actually flinched. "Could you please explain to my family who signs your paychecks?" I asked, my voice carrying just enough authority to remind everyone exactly who was in charge here. "You do, ma'am. You and Martinez Holdings. Have for the past 3 years." He glanced around the table, confusion flickering across his weathered face. "Is there a problem with the meal service?" "No problem at all, Chef. The service has been exceptional, as always. Could you also remind everyone about our staff appreciation policy?" "Certainly. All full-time employees receive health benefits, paid vacation, and profit sharing. You implemented that program when you took ownership, ma'am. Said you remembered what it was like to work for people who didn't value their employees." The impact of his words rippled across the table. Mark's face had gone ashen, while Patricia looked like she might actually be sick. Jennifer was furiously typing on her phone, probably fact-checking everything I'd just revealed. "Thank you, Chef Ramon. That will be all." He nodded and retreated, leaving us alone with the weight of reality settling over the table like a heavy blanket. "Health benefits," I said, settling back into my chair. "Profit sharing, paid vacation. Amazing what you can afford when you actually own the business instead of just skimming management fees off the top." Mark finally found his voice. "Rebecca, why didn't you tell me? Why keep this secret for 3 years?" The hurt in his voice almost broke my resolve. Almost. But then I remembered 2 years of being treated like an unwelcome guest in my own resort, and my sympathy hardened back into steel. "Because I wanted to see who you really were," I said quietly. "All of you. When you thought I had nothing to offer except my devotion to your son, how did you treat me? When you believed I was just some working-class girl who got lucky, what did that bring out in you?" Patricia slammed her hand down on the table, making the glasses jump. "This is manipulation. This is entrapment." "No," I said, my voice deadly calm. "This is consequence. For 2 years, you've shown me exactly who you are when you think you have power over someone, when you think someone is beneath you. Well, congratulations, Patricia. You've revealed your true character, and it's ugly." Jennifer's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen with growing horror. "Oh my God! Mom, she's telling the truth. Martinez Holdings, LLC. It's all here in the public records. She bought the resort from Henderson Properties in 2021 for $12 million. $12 million. Let that number sink in while I tell you how I managed to put together that kind of money. While Patricia was buying her 3rd vacation home with management fees from my property. See, while Jennifer was taking lifestyle photos and Patricia was playing society queen, I was working 18-hour days as a financial consultant. I specialized in distressed properties, places that were bleeding money because of poor management or outdated business models. I'd swoop in, analyze their problems, and either help them turn things around or advise investors on acquisition opportunities. The Coral Bay Resort was perfect. Gorgeous location, solid infrastructure, but hemorrhaging cash because the Hendersons were old-school hoteliers who thought luxury meant overpriced mediocrity. They were 6 months from bankruptcy when I approached them with an offer. But I didn't have $12 million lying around. What I had was something better. A network of investors who trusted my judgment and a business plan that could turn this place into a Caribbean crown jewel. 12 million, Mark repeated, the number seeming to echo in his mind. You put together $12 million to buy this place. 14 million, actually. 12 for the purchase, 2 for immediate renovations and upgrades. I gestured toward the pristine infinity pool, the modernized suites, the state-of-the-art spa facility. Everything you see here that's actually worth praising, that was my investment, my vision, my execution. Patricia's composure was cracking like old paint. But we made this place what it is. But our reputation, our connections, your reputation for what? Mediocre service and inflated prices? When I took over, this place had a 2.8-star average on TripAdvisor and a 70% occupancy rate. Look it up. Jennifer was already typing, her manicured nails clicking frantically against her phone screen. It's 4.7 stars now, with a 94% occupancy rate. Funny how treating your staff well and actually investing in quality improvements can turn a business around, I said. But then again, you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Mark pushed back from the table, running his hands through his hair. I need to understand this. You've been playing some kind of long game for 3 years? Testing us? Testing me? The pain in his voice hit deeper than I'd expected. Despite everything, despite 2 years of watching him let his family diminish me, I still loved him. That was the most complicated part of this whole mess. I wasn't testing you at first, I said softly. When we met, I thought I'd tell you everything eventually. But then I met your family, and I saw how they treated people they considered beneath them. I saw how quickly you started seeing me through their eyes. That's not fair, isn't it? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a voice memo. Remember last month when I suggested we tip Maria extra for her birthday? You said, and I quote, "Babe, if we spoil the help, they'll expect it from everyone." Mark's face went red. I didn't mean... You meant exactly what you said. You've been here so long, breathing their air, that you started talking like them, thinking like them. I put my phone away, my heart breaking a little with each word. You started seeing me like them. The truth was settling over all of them now like a toxic fog. Every condescending comment, every dismissive gesture, every moment they'd made me feel small, it had all been directed at someone who quite literally owned the ground they were sitting on. But here's where the story takes another turn, because the reckoning I'd planned was just getting started. I pulled out another folder from my purse, this one thicker than the first. Patricia, do you remember signing your management contract renewal last year? Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Of course. We negotiated better terms. You negotiated terms with my lawyer, not the Hendersons. That contract you're so proud of? It expires in 3 weeks. I opened the folder, revealing a thick stack of legal documents, and I've decided not to renew it. The words hit the table like a bomb. Jennifer actually gasped, her phone clattering to the marble surface. Mark looked like I'd just told him I was from another planet. You can't do that, Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. We have rights. We have. You have exactly what's written in your contract, which includes a 30-day termination clause with cause. Would you like me to enumerate the causes I've documented over the past 2 years? I began pulling out photographs, printed emails, documented complaints. Verbal abuse of staff members, misuse of resort resources for personal entertainment, unauthorized charges to the business account for your personal shopping trips. Each piece of evidence landed on the table like another nail in their coffin. This is revenge, Jennifer said, her voice shrill with panic. This is petty revenge because we hurt your feelings. No, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria like a blade. This is business. You've been managing my property poorly, treating my employees badly, and damaging my reputation with your entitled behavior. Any reasonable business owner would have fired you months ago. Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. So what? You're going to destroy my family's livelihood because we didn't welcome you warmly enough? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with 2 years of hurt and resentment from both sides. This was the moment I'd been building toward, not just the revelation of ownership, but the decision about what came next. That depends, I said quietly, on whether you're willing to learn from this moment or whether you're going to keep playing the victim. I stood up and walked to the terrace railing, looking out over the pristine beach where resort guests were enjoying their vacation, blissfully unaware of the family drama unfolding above them. The irony wasn't lost on me. People came here to escape their problems while I'd been living mine every single day. For 2 years, I said without turning around, I've watched you treat people like they were disposable. Maria, who's worked here longer than your contract has existed. Chef Ramon, who's turned this restaurant into something worth bragging about. The housekeeping staff who work twice as hard as they should because you refuse to approve proper staffing levels. I turned back to face them, my resolve strengthening with each word. But more than that, I've watched you treat me like I was disposable, like my feelings didn't matter, my background was shameful, my presence was charity. Patricia's mascara was starting to run, black streaks marking her cheeks like war paint. We didn't know. You didn't know because you never bothered to ask. In 2 years of family dinners, not one of you ever asked about my work, my dreams, my goals. You decided who I was based on where I came from, and you treated me accordingly. Mark moved toward me, his hands outstretched. Rebecca, please. If I said things, if I acted in ways that hurt you, I'm sorry. We can work through this. Can we? I pulled out one final document from my folder. This is a new management contract. Better terms, better benefits for the staff, clearer boundaries about personal use of resort resources. It also includes mandatory sensitivity training and a code of conduct that applies to all family members. I set it on the table between us like a gauntlet being thrown down. You can sign this contract and learn to treat people with basic human dignity, or you can pack up your entitled attitudes and find somewhere else to inflict them. The silence that followed was different from the shocked quiet earlier. This was the silence of people weighing their options, calculating costs, measuring their pride against their bank accounts. Jennifer was the first to break. You can't be serious. You're really going to hold our jobs hostage because we were, not welcoming enough? I'm going to hold your jobs to professional standards, something that should have happened years ago. I looked directly at her, this woman who'd spent 2 years making me feel like an intruder. The question is whether you're capable of meeting those standards or whether your ego is more important than your livelihood. Patricia wiped her eyes, smearing her makeup further. And if we don't sign? Then you have 3 weeks to clean out your offices and find new employment. I'll provide standard severance and references that acknowledge your years of service without mentioning the reasons for termination. Mark slumped back into his chair. This is really happening. You're really going to tear our family apart over this. I'm not tearing anything apart, I said, my voice gentler now, but no less firm. I'm offering you a choice. You can continue being the people who treat others as less than human, or you can become the people who learn from their mistakes and do better. I walked back to the table and picked up my purse, leaving the contract and all its implications sitting in front of them like an unexploded bomb. You have 72 hours to decide. Sign the contract and commit to treating every person in this resort with respect, or don't sign it and face the consequences of your choices. As I turned to walk away, Mark called after me, "What about us? What about our marriage?" I stopped, but didn't turn around. That depends on which version of yourself you choose to be, Mark. The man I fell in love with, or the man your family turned you into. The morning sun was just beginning to pierce through the sheer curtains of the master suite when I woke up alone. Mark had slept in the guest room, The first time in our 2 years of marriage that we'd spent a night apart while under the same roof. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of us. I'd given them 72 hours to make their decision, and as I sat on the private balcony of the suite I'd designed myself, sipping coffee made from beans I'd personally sourced from a small farm in Jamaica, I realized something profound. I wasn't nervous about their answer anymore. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like myself again. Not the diminished version of Rebecca who apologized for taking up space, but the woman who'd built a multi-million-dollar business through sheer determination and strategic thinking. My phone buzzed with a text from my business partner and best friend, Sarah. "How did the family meeting go? Are you ready to implement Phase 2? Phase 2. Even Sarah didn't know all the details of what I'd been planning, but she knew me well enough to trust that I had contingencies for every possible outcome. I was typing my response when I heard footsteps on the marble floor behind me. Mark appeared in the doorway looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed from what I assumed was a sleepless night. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I gestured to the chair across from me, and he sat down heavily. For a long moment, we just looked at each other across the small table where we'd shared so many morning coffees, back when our biggest concern was whether to have breakfast on the terrace or by the pool. "I keep trying to understand how we got here," he said finally. "When did we stop being honest with each other?" The question hit deeper than I'd expected. "When did you stop seeing me as an equal?" I countered. "When did my opinion stop mattering? When did you start explaining my own feelings to me?" Mark flinched like I'd slapped him. "I never meant to make you feel that way." "Intent doesn't erase impact, Mark. You may not have meant to diminish me, but you did it anyway. Every time you dismissed my suggestions as naive. Every time you sided with your family when they excluded me. Every time you told me I was being too sensitive when they hurt my feelings." I set down my coffee cup, the clink of ceramic against marble, unnaturally loud in the morning quiet. "Do you want to know what really broke my heart? It wasn't your mother's snide comments or Jennifer's passive-aggressive posts. It was watching the man I love slowly start to agree with them." Mark buried his face in his hands. "God, Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I was trying to keep the peace, trying to make everyone happy, and I lost sight of what mattered most. Which was you, us, the life we were supposed to be building together." He looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I let them convince me that love meant accepting their treatment of you, that family loyalty meant choosing their comfort over your dignity. The admission hung between us like a bridge, fragile, but possibly strong enough to support the weight of rebuilding." "The contract," Mark said quietly. "Have you read it?" I nodded. "Every word. It's fair but firm. It protects the staff, establishes clear boundaries, and requires accountability from everyone in management positions, including mandatory therapy, family counseling, and individual sessions for anyone who wants to continue working here." "Especially that," I said, "because this isn't just about employment, Mark. This is about breaking patterns that have probably existed in your family for generations." Mark was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the ocean where early morning swimmers were already enjoying the warm Caribbean water. "My grandmother used to say that good breeding was about how you treated people who couldn't do anything for you. I think somewhere along the way, my family forgot that lesson. It's not too late to remember it." "Isn't it?" He looked at me with something that might have been hope. "After everything that's happened, after all the ways I've failed you, is it really possible to fix this?" The question I'd been asking myself for months, the question that had kept me awake during countless nights when I lay beside him, wondering if the man I'd married was still in there somewhere, underneath all the privilege and presumption. "That depends," I said, echoing the words I'd spoken yesterday, "on whether you're willing to do the work, real work, not just lip service." My phone rang, interrupting the moment. Sarah's name flashed on the screen, and I hesitated before answering. but Sarah only called this early when something important was happening. "Good morning, partner." Her familiar voice filled the quiet morning air. "I'm assuming you're sitting down." "Should I be worried?" "Only if you consider a full-page feature in Caribbean Business Weekly something to worry about. Turns out someone leaked the story about the Martinez family management shakeup." My blood ran cold. "What story?" "Rebecca Martinez, mystery millionaire businesswoman, reveals secret ownership of luxury resort while confronting family discrimination, complete with photos from yesterday's lunch meeting and quotes from unnamed staff members about the improved working conditions under your ownership." Mark's eyes went wide as he caught enough of the conversation to understand the implications. If this story went public, it wouldn't just be about our family drama anymore. It would be about the larger issues of workplace dignity, family power dynamics, and the ethics of inherited privilege. "Sarah, how did this get out so fast?" "Well," her voice carried a note of mischief that I knew all too well. "It turns out that when you dramatically reveal your secret identity at a resort lunch meeting, people notice, staff members talk, other guests overhear things. And when one of those guests happens to be a freelance journalist who recognizes a great human interest story, oh God, it gets better or worse, depending on your perspective. The journalist reached out to several former employees who painted a very clear picture of the before and after culture at the resort. Unanimous praise for your management style and some pretty damning quotes about how things used to be." I closed my eyes, trying to process the implications. This was supposed to be a private family reckoning, not a public spectacle. "There's more," Sarah continued. "3 other hotels in the area have reached out wanting to know if you're interested in consulting on their workplace culture. Apparently, word is spreading that you've figured out how to run a luxury resort without treating your staff like indentured servants." Mark was listening to every word now, his face cycling through emotions I couldn't quite read. When I hung up the phone, he was staring at me with something that looked almost like awe. "You really did it," he said quietly. "You didn't just buy a resort. You changed an entire industry standard. I treated people like human beings. It shouldn't be revolutionary, but apparently it is. And now the whole world is going to know about our family's failures." I studied his face, looking for signs of resentment or blame. Instead, I found something I hadn't expected: relief. "You know what the strangest part is?" Mark said, leaning back in his chair. "I'm not angry about the publicity. I'm embarrassed, yes. Ashamed, absolutely. But not angry." He met my eyes directly. "I'm proud of you." The words hit me like a physical force. After 2 years of feeling like I had to make myself smaller to fit into his world, hearing him say he was proud of who I really was felt like coming home. "I spent so long trying to protect my family's reputation," he continued, "that I forgot reputation should be based on actual character, not just public perception." Before I could respond, there was a knock at the suite door. Mark and I looked at each other, neither of us expecting visitors this early. I opened the door to find Patricia and Jennifer standing in the hallway, both looking like they'd been awake all night. Patricia was clutching a copy of the contract, and Jennifer had what looked like a printed news article in her hands. "We need to talk," Patricia said, her voice stripped of its usual authority. I stepped aside to let them in, and they walked onto the balcony where Mark and I had been having our conversation. The 4 of us sat around the small table, the morning sun highlighting the stress lines that seemed to have appeared overnight on both women's faces. "The article," Jennifer said without preamble. "Is it accurate?" "Which parts?" I asked. "All of it. The part about you improving working conditions. The part about profit sharing and health benefits. The part about..." She swallowed hard. "The part about how we treated the staff before you took over." I nodded. "All accurate." Patricia set the contract down on the table with shaking hands. "We've read this, every word, multiple times. And we want to understand something." Patricia said, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "This contract, it's generous. More generous than we probably deserve after everything." She was right. The contract I'd drawn up included salary increases, better benefits, and profit-sharing opportunities that went well beyond industry standard. It also included the accountability measures and required training, but the financial terms were actually quite favorable. "Why?" Jennifer asked. "After the way we've treated you, why are you offering us anything at all?" It was the question I'd been wrestling with for months, the question that had kept me up at night, weighing justice against mercy, accountability against forgiveness. "Because," I said slowly, "destroying you wouldn't actually accomplish anything positive. It would just create more hurt, more anger, more broken relationships, and because I believe people can change if they really want to." Patricia was crying now. Not the angry tears from yesterday, but something deeper and more genuine. "I was so threatened by you," she whispered. "From the moment Mark brought you home, I could see how much he loved you, and I was terrified that meant he'd love us less." "So you tried to make me smaller," I said, "to make me less threatening." "Yes, and it was wrong. It was petty and cruel and—" She looked directly at me for the first time in 2 years. It was everything my own mother taught me never to be. Jennifer wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup. "I've been thinking about Maria all night, about how many times I've snapped at her, ordered her around, treated her like she was invisible. She's been working here longer than I've been alive, and I never even learned her last name." "Gonzalez," I said quietly. "Maria Gonzalez. She has 4 grandchildren, and she's putting her youngest daughter through nursing school with the money she earns here." Jennifer's face crumpled. "Oh, God, I'm everything I used to hate about rich people. I became everything I swore I'd never be." Mark reached across the table and took his sister's hand. "We all did. We got so comfortable with privilege that we forgot it was supposed to come with responsibility." I looked around the table at these 3 people who had made my life so difficult, and I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't hate them anymore. I was still hurt, still angry about the lost time and the damage done, but the consuming resentment that had been eating at me for months was gone. "The training program," Patricia said, picking up the contract again. "Family counseling, sensitivity workshops, conflict resolution. You really think it will help?" "I think you have to want it to help," I said. "I think you have to be willing to look at yourselves honestly and do the uncomfortable work of changing ingrained patterns. And if we do the work, if we sign this contract and actually follow through on everything it requires," I looked at Mark, then at his mother and sister. "Then we try to build something better, not perfect, because perfect doesn't exist, but better." Patricia stood up and walked to the railing, looking out over the resort she'd thought she owned for so many years. "I keep thinking about my mother," she said without turning around. "She would be so ashamed of who I've become. She raised me to believe that true class meant lifting others up, not putting them down." "It's not too late to honor that lesson," I said. She turned back to face us, her eyes red but determined. "If we sign this contract, if we do the work, will you give us a real chance, not just professionally, but as a family?" The question hung in the morning air, weighted with the possibility of redemption or the continued cycle of hurt and resentment. I looked at Mark, who was watching me, with something that looked like hope, and I realized that this moment would define not just our immediate future, but the kind of people we all chose to become. "Yes," I said finally, "but understand this. Trust is earned, not given. Respect is earned, not demanded. And dignity is something every person deserves, regardless of their background or bank account." Patricia picked up the pen from the table and, without hesitation, signed her name to the contract. Jennifer followed suit, her signature shaky but determined. When Mark signed last, adding his name below his mother's and sister's, I felt something shift in the air around us. Not resolution exactly, but possibility. The chance that people really could change, that families really could heal, that love really could be stronger than pride. As the sun climbed higher over the Caribbean, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I realized that my little social experiment had revealed something I hadn't expected to find. Not just who these people were at their worst, but who they might become at their best. The help, it turned out, didn't just own the resort. She owned the power to choose mercy over revenge, growth over destruction, and hope over resentment. And for the first time in 2 years, that felt like enough.